Welcome back to our walk through the Bible. This time we are in the book of Joshua. Joshua, of course, being the humble servant of Moses, the man that was mentored by Moses, trained in warfare, and the one who is going to lead the children of Israel into victory, into the promised land. One of the key verses for this book is chapter 3 and verse 5, that is certainly not only powerful in their context, but is as well with the church and with us individually. It's chapter 3 and verse 5, where Joshua says to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." That is something we need to keep in mind individually, that yesterday is past, and now tomorrow is ahead of us, and the Lord is planning on doing that. It doesn't matter what happened in the past, good or bad or indifferent, He has plans for the future. And this is certainly a powerful verse for the church. No matter how difficult the times were in the past or how many blessings of the past and good times in the past, God does not desire for His people to live in the past. He has more wonders to show His people. So consecrate yourselves, Joshua says. In other words, prepare yourselves. Set yourselves apart. Let's do it right this time as this new generation prepares to enter into the promised land. So our key words for the book of Joshua certainly include words such as land. Land occurs 80 times in this book. The physical receiving of the land is in Joshua. The word give is found 68 times. As a reminder that this isn't just about seeing how the battles go. The Lord has already promised to give you this land. It's a done deal. Although you're going to go in there and fight, He is going to give you that victory. Another key word is possession. It occurs 11 times. This is your possession, even as you go in to take possession. Inheritance is found 47 times. They will have their inheritance in this land that flows with milk and honey, and then they will rest. Rest being another key word, occurring some 6 times. So, according to the book of Joshua, they received all of this. They received all of the land. God followed through with His promises. Joshua focused on God's power and the fulfillment of His promises. And so in chapter 21, we see very clearly, and this is an important theological truth for the rest of Scripture, that they received what God had promised. Chapter 21, verse 43, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land which He had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that He had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." A wonderful summary statement of the Lord's faithfulness in the book of Joshua. So as we think about that promise, it takes us back to where we began our walk through the Bible, back in Genesis, where in chapter 15 we made note of the covenant that God was making with Abraham, where He told him that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the heavens. But He said, "Know for certain," this is in Genesis 15, beginning in verse 13, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. And of course, that's taking place between Genesis and at the beginning of the book of Exodus. He says, "I'll judge the nation whom they will serve. Afterward, they will come out with many possessions." That's the Exodus. And then jumping down to verse 16, "Then in the 4th generation they shall return here," that being the land of Canaan, "for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete." And I bring that back up again, particularly verse 16, to remember that at that point, God is showing mercy to the Amorites. When He says that their iniquity is not yet complete. In other words, this isn't at the point where God is going to take out vengeance upon them and punish them. It really is a period of mercy. But in the book of Joshua, that period has been completed. And now the Lord in His righteousness and in His justice is executing a punishment upon people that have spurned him, that have not seen his power and his glory from nature, as Romans chapter 1 explains. And I think that's a helpful connection for us to make as we see some of the bloody battles in the book of Joshua. And we'll come back to that here in just a minute. Let me give you a 2-point outline of the entire book. Point number 1 being chapters 1 through 12 is the conquest of Canaan, where all these battles are taking place. And then the second point is chapters 13 through 24, the settlement in the land. Of course, in that first part, chapters 1 through 12, is where we have the crossing of the Jordan River, and it's also where we have the story of Rahab, always referred to as Rahab the harlot. We have 2 spies going in to see the city of Jericho. So here we are again with spies going in to see what's going on and bring back a report to the children of Israel. So we're kind of holding our breath. We know how this turned out in Numbers 13 and also in Numbers 14. So we have 2 spies rather than 12 going in to spy out the land, and it's there that they come to the house of Rahab. And I've wondered, why Rahab? Of all the places that they could come to. And some of the options are that hers was the first house. It was a house on the wall itself. Someone else has said maybe it would be less noticeable coming to her house for obvious reasons. Or maybe it's just God showing us that He can use whoever He wants to in this plan that He has for giving them the city of Jericho. But you remember the story that word gets out that a couple of spies have come, and they come to her house, and she tells her people, yes, they were here, but they have left. She lies to them. She's hid them at her house under sheets of flax, and so these people go searching for the spies elsewhere. So not only is she introduced as a harlot, but she's also introduced to us as one who lies. But don't miss out on her faith. In chapter 2, in verses 10 and 11, there's such a stark contrast between her faith and the children of Israel's faith back in, again, Numbers 13, back there at Kadesh Barnea. Let me read for you what she says. Backing up to verse 9, she says, I know, this is her saying this to the spies, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. That phrase, melted away, in the New American Standard, literally means that they have become demoralized. Her people have become demoralized. Why is that? Verse 10, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, the Exodus, coming out of Egypt. So they heard that story about His deliverance of these people out of Egypt and the crossing of the Red Sea, all of those things that generation witnessed firsthand that rebelled against the Lord at Kadesh Barnea. And so she says in verse 11, when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven, above and on earth beneath. So what an incredible contrast to God's people back in Numbers chapter 13, when their heart was melting because of the report of the 10 spies, when they were losing their courage. And meanwhile, these unbelievers in Yahweh, their hearts were melting as they at least knew that the children of Israel's God was a powerful and victorious God. So that's quite an interesting interplay there with the idea of being demoralized. Of course, in Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 31, is where we're told that her hiding of these spies was by faith. And how did her faith come in Yahweh? By hearing about His works. She hid those spies, and so she's there in the hall of faith. Nothing is said about the fact that she had repented of being a harlot or there was any excuse for her lie, but what she did was based upon what she knew about God. Same thing in James chapter 2 and verse 25, where Rahab the harlot was justified by works. In other words, she expressed her understanding of what this God has done through her actions, specifically in hiding those spies. So we have that going on. We have the spies' report, by the way, at the end of chapter 2. And you come down to verse 23, and these two men are coming back to the children of Israel to relate to them what happened, these same two spies. And I've got out in the margin of my Bible between verse 23 and 24, hold your breath. Okay, we're hoping that these spies are going to give a positive report, and we don't do this whole 40 years of wandering. Of course, we know how it turns out. But verse 24, they said to Joshua, surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and all the inhabitants of the land, moreover, have melted away before us. That is, they've become demoralized. So, praise God, that's the report that those 10 spies were supposed to give back in Numbers chapter 13. Yes, there's armies. Yes, there's fortified cities. But if those spies had said what these two spies are saying, they could have foregone the wandering in the wilderness. Surely the Lord has given us all of this land. So we've come full circle as we come to the end of chapter 2. Of course, we have several battles going on from chapter 6 through 12. The Battle of Jericho in chapter 6 is a good one to teach the kids. However, I've noticed that we leave out verse 21 when we're teaching the kids, and that's probably a good thing. And we usually don't talk about the battles in chapters 8 and 9 and 10. You look at chapter 11, and there's this reoccurring phrase that no one is left who breathed. These are some incredible battles where everyone in that city was exterminated. And one of those, I do want to point out on one of those battles, chapter 11 and verse 20, there's a little phrase that's used that was used back in Exodus with Pharaoh as far as hardening the hearts. Chapter 11, verse 20, still here in Joshua, it was of the Lord to harden their hearts to meet Israel in battle in order that he might utterly destroy them, that they might receive no mercy, and that he might destroy them. Well, if you're just reading along in Joshua and think, what kind of God is this that would show no mercy? That's where we need to remember, back when that covenant was made with Abraham in Genesis 15, God was showing mercy. Mercy for some 400 years. We think of mercy in these little small time frames. Show mercy to me today, but God had shown mercy to that land for over 400 years. But now his righteousness and his justice demand that, as well as the fulfillment of these promises, that these cities be wiped out. And listen to verse 21. Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. And I have in the margin of my Bible Numbers 13 and verse 28, because those were some of the ones that those 10 spies back there at Kadesh Barnea were fearful of. They were fearful of the Anakim. Now we have Joshua wiping out the Anakim. There's no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel in verse 22. So we're coming full circle with some of those things with the children of Israel. And again, most of those are not taught to the little kids, and rightly so, especially there in chapter 11. So as we come to chapter 24, we have Joshua doing exactly what Moses had done and giving a history of God's work to the people. That's kind of what we're doing here in the walk through the Bible. We're reflecting upon God's faithfulness, his goodness, all of his works among his people. And so beginning in chapter 24, Joshua stands before the people and he tells them about events that we looked at in Genesis and also, of course, Exodus, that God brought them out of Egypt, verse 6. Goes through some of the battles that we read about in Numbers. And so we come down to verse 13, and Joshua reminds them that God has given them a land on which they had not labored, and cities which they had not built, and they're living in them, and they're eating of vineyards and olive groves which they did not plant. You may be thinking, now that sounds a little familiar. Well, with this very same generation, back in Deuteronomy chapter 6, when the parents were told to write these verses up on the walls and on the doorpost, that's where we heard that before, that you were to convey to your sons and to your grandsons that God is going to fulfill His covenant, His oath with His people. And you're going to live in, Deuteronomy 6, verse 11, houses which you did not build, cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you shall eat and be satisfied. That was the promise to those kids, and that promise is being fulfilled in the book of Joshua. But, going back to Deuteronomy 6 for just a minute, the follow-up from that promise in verse 12 is this: then watch yourselves, lest you forget the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. We saw that not only in Deuteronomy with Moses, we see it with Joshua as well. Recounting of all of the wonderful things that God has done, but then that extra warning tagged on the end. But don't forget the Lord. Forgetfulness of the Lord brings disaster. And of course that's going to lead us in to the book of Judges next time. But for now, we're just going to soak in the victory of the book of Joshua. We're going to have a little conversation with Jason Mounts of some leadership principles that we see with the men of Joshua, and we hope that that will be helpful to you and that you will join us next time as we move into the book of Judges. We're welcoming Jason Mounts, one of our shepherds here at the Sylvan Hills Church, to the table to have further discussion on the book of Joshua. Thank you, Jason, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As we think about the leadership of Joshua, he really is a shepherd. And that analogy is used way back in Numbers chapter 27, where Moses spoke to the Lord and said, "May the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who will go out and come in before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep which have no shepherd." And God himself tells Moses to appoint Joshua, which he had already had this mentoring relationship with him. So it seems to me, Jason, that all of that's coming together back in Numbers and even in Deuteronomy, where Joshua is brought out before the people and Moses is laying hands on him, and it's just it really is a good public commissioning for the people. And I don't know, how do you feel about, are we really, how are we doing in that today when it comes to shepherding and leading and helping people know that there's leaders and direction?
Yeah, sure. You know, as I'm going through this study with you, and I'm hearing things like this, it makes me think we're not doing as good a job as we could be doing for this. You know, it seems like we probably don't have those things in place like God has put in place here with Moses and Joshua, and I think we're doing ourselves and the body a disservice when we don't do those types of things, because there's so much importance and power in that, what Moses and Joshua were doing. I mean, just specifically for them, can you imagine, you know, the multitude of people that are out there in this place, you know, and them just not having any idea really what's going on, or, you know, they don't know the story like we do. Mm-hmm. So to know that Moses has brought them this far, and they've kind of been in and out with Moses, and but, you know, to get to this point and for them to be able to see kind of this transfer of power from Moses to Joshua, and to have Joshua being their shepherd for that, you know, that amount of time where he is engaged with the people, like they are developing relationship through all that, and it's such a great visual, so that when the day finally comes, there's not this confusion. There's not, oh, well, what's this going to be like? Who's this new guy, you know? No.
Right. There's not a leadership vacuum there where
not
others might step in that didn't have that relationship with the Lord that Joshua did. Well, that day comes in chapter 1, actually at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses dies, and there's some 30 days of mourning and weeping over him. They're honoring Moses. They're remembering the leadership that he had. But the book of Joshua does begin in verse 2 by saying Moses is dead. It's appointed for us to all die. We're all getting older, and we need to be thinking ahead on these leadership principles and conveying that to the next generation. So the rest of that in verse 2 is, Moses is dead, now therefore arise. that's a difficult thing to do after such a strong leader
Oh, yeah.
has been in that position.
Yeah, and great for Joshua that he's been able to be with Moses for this whole time, and to have, hopefully, a smoother transition. 'Cause yeah, that's a tough place to be when you've lost a leader like Moses. I mean, you just look. I mean, maybe other than Joshua, there's not another leader, like that for the Israelites for so long, and you've lost that person, and now God's not. He doesn't say just sit there in your, just sit there and don't do anything. No, there's still work to be done. The work hasn't stopped just because my man Moses is gone. There's so much work to be done. So yeah,
Right.
It's time to get up and move.
Yes, and that's such a key word there. Arise. Now, therefore, arise. It's a big transition taking place there in verse 2. And it happens in the local church context as well. There's the honoring of the past, but there's also that time to say, okay, now let's arise. Yeah. Let's arise and walk with the Lord into the future. Again, chapter 3 and verse 5 being the key verse in my estimation for Joshua. Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. He did it in the past, and He's going to do it in the future. So I was wondering if you would speak to verses 6 through 9, and just that key phrase of being strong and courageous. It's what Moses had told Joshua, and it's what Joshua's conveying to the people. He can't convey that to the people if he's not that way himself, can he?
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, and it makes me wonder when you hear this phrase so much. Be strong and be strong and courageous. It makes me wonder: was Joshua already strong and courageous, or are we hearing this because he's not? Mm-hmm. Is that just who Joshua is, or is he needing even to be encouraged to be this because he's not, and depending on God? I look at these verses here and I see this promise that God is putting forth first. The promise of every place where you set your foot, will be your place. So he's reminding them of the promise, and then he's saying, so here's what you've got to do. You've got to be strong and you've got to be courageous because you will lead these people to inherit the earth.
Maybe he felt like he was being crazy.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, we know at least when he and Caleb brought back their report back at Kadesh and Barnea that they were strong and courageous. But that's an interesting thought. That's not always a constant with us. We have an ebb and flow. So there's a reminder to him first.
Yeah, absolutely. And rightly so. I mean, even though Joshua has seen all of these things, well, Moses is now dead. I mean, going back to verse 2, Moses is now dead, and Joshua has seen all of these things with Moses.
With Moses.
Yeah, and now Joshua's just kind of, maybe not left there by himself, but maybe feeling like that too. But God's saying, no, I'm with you.
Right.
I'm with you, and we're going to do this together.
Right.
Here's what I need you to do.
So we have that arise in chapter 1. Then over with the Battle of Jericho in chapter 6 and verse 7, after they've gone around the city 7 times on the 7th day with the loud shout, then he is to say to the people, go forward. And that is such a good leadership principle there. When you're put in that position of leadership, it's to move forward. It's to lead the people forward with God.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so hard to do because I think for us, at least in our society now, looking back seems to be kind of the thing that we do a little easier, maybe. It's harder to look forward because it requires so much more faith. It's nice to try to have things planned out, but sometimes you don't know what that next step is going to be. So yeah, absolutely. With that in Jericho, I even go back to when they were getting ready to cross the Jordan, and they, what does he say? He says that the priest will step foot in the water. The priests don't step foot on dry land, right? They stand in the water, and we're at flood stage, right? So we've got some water rolling through, and they step in the water first, and then God does that. So they're moving forward in faith,
right?
And then God does some pretty big things right after that.
Absolutely, it gives him an opportunity to show forth his glory when they arise and march forward. Yeah. So it's interesting. We come over to chapter 13, and you pointed this verse out to me originally, where God God has an interesting statement then to Joshua himself about his age by the time we get to chapter 13.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I love it. I was reading through this when you were telling me that you wanted me to visit with you about it, so I just went ahead and read through the whole book, and I got to chapter 13, and this stuck out. It was so funny. It's like verse 1. I've never even seen this before, but when Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." And I read that, and I just thought, yeah, Joshua, yeah, he's getting up there in years, and God's reminding him of that. He's just like telling him, "You're old." But that interesting thing is the next statement. God doesn't say, "You're very old, so I want you to take a break for your last few years, just enjoy the fruits of your labor," or whatever. God's saying, there's work to be done in my kingdom. Right. And you're still the guy to do it. And I still need you, regardless of you being old or whatever,
That is powerful.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also in the next chapter that we have Caleb, who's 85 years old, saying, at least in the New American Standard, he's saying, "Give me this hill country." I like it better in the King James Version, where he's saying, "Give me this mountain." And he will say, "I'm still as strong today as I was in the day of Moses." So it was really the mentality of, I'm not done yet.
That's right.
And that's a great encouragement to us that doesn't matter what age we are in this, that if we're walking with the Lord, there's still work to be done. Yeah. Well, let's jump over for just a minute to the end of the book, and Joshua's, we got his farewell address in chapter 23, his little history that he gives in chapter 24 that I'd mentioned, but I'd like for us to think about verses 14 and 15. What a great message for the people. What a great way to steer them the right direction and speak truth. "Fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether these gods," and he mentions them again, but at the end of the verse, "but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And ultimately, that's all a leader can do today. We can't force people to choose the Lord, but we can say, here's what I'm doing, and here's the benefits. And
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that he tells them, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then go ahead and choose who you're going to serve. Yeah, just go ahead and make the choice. Don't be wishy-washy. Let's choose who it's going to be. But yeah, Joshua's saying, as for me and my household, this is what we're going to do. And I think if you look at that from the perspective of the people, and now they have seen Joshua when he was kind of a semi-leader, or still a leader, when Moses was still there, and now Moses is gone, and they've done all of these things with God, but they see Joshua, they see what he's doing, and then it's like, okay, well, now Joshua says, "Me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord." Like, this is someone that these people look up to. Right. This is not somebody who's just trying to come on the scene and trying to rally some people around them. This is somebody who has lived in the midst of them, and they have seen all the things that he's done. And so that means something when he says, "This is the path that me and my family are going to follow." Right. And I think for us as leaders today, I think that is so key. If we're looking at what does the church look like today? What are we doing? what are we doing? Where does God seem like he's trying to get us to move towards? And when we say, our families, this is what we see God calling us to do, and we've been with the people, and we've been in this congregation for a while, and people know us and respect our thoughts and opinions. Not that we're always right by any means, but when they see those things, and then you have a leader stand up and say, this is the direction we need to go. This spiritually, whatever.
Right. That really connects with 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, in that the local church is seeing this person's family, how they've led in their family before making them shepherds in that local church. So it's a matter of the spiritual leadership that this person already possesses, and so there's confidence in that. That really brings us back full circle to that idea of not being like sheep without a shepherd. And they're not. And that choice that he gives them at the end is so powerful. It's the choice that you and I have today as well. Even with good leaders, we've got to choose ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think for us as leaders, but for individuals as well, families, I think it's so important that that we are listening to what God is telling us in our lives. You know, I mean, why are we bothering praying about things if we're not going to then turn around and listen to what God has to say? And I know in our heritage, you know, for so long we've kind of had a lot of questions about, well, what does the Spirit really do? Does God really talk to us, or you know, whatever? Because we don't hear that audible. But the thing is, we don't really know how God spoke to Joshua either, right? We don't know what that communication style really was. But Joshua was listening to what God had to say, and he followed through with it. And I think for us, for all of us, whether you're just whether you're a single parent, or you're, you know, trying to run a company, or you're, you know, trying to lead a church, you know, whatever it is, we have to be asking God constantly, what do you need me to do? What do you need me to do? And then we have to stop and slow down and listen. And then then we have to be courageous to be able to say, you know, I believe the Spirit is moving me in this direction, and to do this, to walk in this with God. You know?
Yeah, and if we're not, and I understand the hesitancy that you're saying there, and saying that this is what God wants me to do, because we've seen abuses of that in the past. But if we're not leading in such a way that we can say this is what we believe that God is wanting us to do, as we're trying to discern His will, as we're praying about this and studying through it, if we're not doing that, then really it's just secular leadership. Yeah. It's just earthly leadership if we're not doing it with God.
Absolutely, and that scares me more than more than, you know, what is it that, you know, trying to figure out what God's trying to tell you. Because if really all it comes down to is, you know, how well can, you know, me and some other guys lead this congregation on our own, you know, abilities, then we're all in trouble. I mean, we really are. I mean, what are we doing here, and why are we even doing what we're doing? You know, if we have to expect that if we are in this position for the right reasons, we have to expect that if we humble ourselves and ask, God is going to help us do exactly what He wants, because it's His work, it's His kingdom. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's what's happening in the book of Joshua. And as a result, in verse 31 of the last chapter, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua. And that's a good place to end. And unfortunately, we must go into Judges, though, next time. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jason, for those excellent thoughts. And we will see you next time for Judges.